The laboratory was on the verge of collapse. Alarms screamed as the red emergency lights bathed the sterile, white hallways in an eerie glow. Emergency personnel dashed back and forth, frantic voices echoing off the concrete floors. The air buzzed with panic, and the faint hum of machinery was drowned out by the noise of metal doors slamming shut. At the center of it all stood Dr. Aidan O'Rourke, his white lab coat now streaked with dirt and dust, his wild, disheveled hair a sharp contrast to the otherwise pristine environment. His brow furrowed in concentration as he watched the containment chamber ahead of him slowly break apart. A small glass vial inside the chamber, containing the antimatter virus, had shattered. The moment it cracked, the virus had escaped, spreading in shimmering tendrils, devouring anything in its path. It was supposed to be the perfect weapon. A synthetic virus created to wipe out viruses, bacteria, and any form of disease by rewriting the molecular structure of any material it encountered. It had all the right potential, a self-sustaining, unstoppable force. Now it was eating the world alive. Aidan swallowed hard as he saw the glass fragments disintegrate into nothingness, the particles vanishing as if they had never existed. The virus was eating through the air itself. "Aidan," someone shouted. It was Dr. Thompson, the lead researcher of the project, his face ashen with fear. "The containment's breached. Get out of there." Aidan didn't need to be told twice. His legs instinctively propelled him toward the emergency exit, but before he could take more than a few steps, the walls seemed to ripple, warping under the influence of the virus. It wasn't just consuming the physical space, it was distorting the very fabric of reality around it. Everything froze for a split second, then Aidan realized something terrifying: that he wasn't being affected. He wasn't disintegrating like everything else. Instead, he felt alive. Alive in a way that sent his pulse racing, his senses heightened, and his mind expanding. He looked down at his hands and noticed something strange. Where the virus had touched his skin, there were faint, shimmering lines of light pulsing beneath the surface. The virus wasn't harming him. It was integrating. That he turned back toward Thompson. "I'm not." Before he could finish, Thompson screamed as his body vanished into a cloud of particles, his last words lost in the chaos. Aidan's stomach lurched. The virus had consumed him instantly, erasing him from existence without so much as a trace. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The antimatter virus was eating the world alive, erasing all matter in its path. And yet, Aidan could absorb it. Aidan didn't know how long he wandered the desolate hallways of the lab. He moved through the chaos like a ghost, untouched by the destruction all around him. As the virus spread, he saw walls vanish into nothingness, the floors turning into voids of empty space. The outside world must have been worse. The virus had escaped the facility, and now it was spreading like wildfire, consuming the planet, erasing people, places, entire cities. But Aidan could feel it. The virus, in all its terrifying power, was feeding off him, becoming part of him. He reached out instinctively, absorbing more of it, and with every new wave, the pain intensified. The process was like trying to drink from a fire hose, but with every gulp, his body felt weaker, like he was slowly unraveling from the inside. That he felt his heart pound in his chest, faster and faster, and his breathing became shallow. His limbs trembled. His muscles, his skin, his bones, they were all being eaten away, like a puzzle whose pieces were being torn apart, yet somehow, he could still feel it. There was power, unimaginable power, coursing through him. But the more he took in, the more his body betrayed him. His flesh, instead of healing, began to break down, cell by cell. "Am I dying?" Aidan staggered through the wreckage, his mind in a haze. He could see his own body deteriorating before his eyes, his skin becoming translucent in places, the muscles beneath turning to ash. He wanted to scream, but his voice failed him. There was no time. There was no time to be human. Yet in the chaos of destruction, he realized something else. He had to stop the virus, but not at the cost of his life. If he kept absorbing it, he would disintegrate. But if he didn't, if he let the virus continue unchecked, the world would end. The weeks that followed were a blur of destruction and madness. Aiden's every step was a fight against his own body, as if his very existence was a battlefield between his humanity and the all-consuming force of the virus. He avoided large cities, where the virus raged unchecked, instead choosing to hide in the ruins of abandoned laboratories and research stations. During those days, he worked feverishly to understand the virus, to find any clue that might lead to a cure, or at the very least, a way to stop its spread. But the more he absorbed, the less human he became. It wasn't just his body. His mind was fracturing as well. Every night, he felt like he was drifting further away from the person he once was. Memories became distorted, emotions dull. His humanity was slipping, piece by piece, like sand through his fingers. Still, the virus wouldn't let go. And neither would he. In the quiet aftermath of a world in chaos, Aiden stumbled upon a faint glimmer of hope. A small group of survivors, huddled in the remains of a science facility, had heard of his unusual immunity. They were the last remnants of a global research team that had been working on a potential cure for the virus before the world fell apart. Among them was Dr. Amelia Carson, a brilliant immunologist with a sharp mind and a colder heart. She had heard rumors of Aiden's unique connection to the antimatter virus, and she believed he was the key to ending the nightmare. "You're the only one who can stop it," Amelia said, her eyes narrowing as she assessed Aiden's deteriorating condition. Aiden's laugh was hollow. "I don't think you understand. I am the virus now." She shook her head. "You can still fight it. If we can figure out how to reverse the damage, we might be able to stop it from spreading further." But Aiden wasn't sure he had the strength to hold on. The virus inside him was consuming him, piece by piece, mind and body alike. He could feel himself slipping further with every passing day. "I don't know how much longer I have, Amelia," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "If I keep absorbing the virus, I'll be gone soon. But if I stop, you'll kill us all," Amelia finished for him. "We need to find a cure. We need to stop the virus, and you're the only one who can help us do it." Aiden closed his eyes, weighing the odds in his mind. His body was breaking down. His soul felt frayed, as if it were hanging by a thread. But there was no other choice. If he couldn't stop the virus, it would consume everything, including him. Aiden's body felt like it was no longer his own. He had become a stranger to himself, trapped in the wreckage of his own flesh. The virus pulsed through him, its power making his body tremble, his bones creak as though they might snap at any moment. His once vibrant appearance had turned gaunt, almost skeletal, as if he were aging at a rate far beyond what was natural. And yet, there was something else, something he couldn't ignore. A strange strength that came with each agonizing breath, a power that made him feel like he could do anything, or nothing at all. In the quiet moments between his fading thoughts, Aiden found himself standing at the edge of an open field, staring at the remnants of a city in the distance. It had been a bustling place once, a place of hope and progress. Now it was nothing but a charred skeleton, the twisted metal and crumbling concrete markers of a world that had already been erased. His mind, usually sharp and quick, struggled to focus, to connect the dots. Every time he absorbed more of the virus, it was like a part of his humanity slipped through his fingers, leaving only a husk behind. The worst part was the dreams. Sometimes, when he managed to close his eyes, he felt as though he were floating in a sea of blackness, the virus taking over, pulling him into an endless void. It wasn't just his body that was dying. It was his mind, too. Each time he let the virus inside, a piece of him vanished, until all that remained was the desperation to hold on. The pain of knowing that whatever this was, whatever he had become, it wasn't just an accident. It was the product of something engineered. Something intentional. He had begun to remember the faces of the people behind this madness, scientists, researchers, those who had thought they were playing gods, tinkering with forces they didn't understand. They hadn't meant to destroy the world, not at first. But once they realized what they had created, there had been no going back. They'd thought the virus would be a tool, a weapon to reshape society, to reset humanity, to create the perfect race of survivors. Instead, it had become a force of nature, a cosmic reckoning, an unstoppable tide that tore through everything in its path. But Aiden was still here. He was still standing, still fighting, even though it was starting to feel like he was fighting against himself. Do you think it's too late? Amelia's voice broke through his thoughts, soft yet urgent. He turned to find her standing in the doorway of the abandoned research facility they had taken refuge in. She was different now, more worn than when they first met. She had become more than just an ally, more than just a scientist looking for answers. She had become a part of this madness, just like him, tangled in the web of destruction that had been woven by people far more arrogant than they could ever understand. No, Aiden said, though the word felt hollow as it left his lips. I don't think it's too late. Not yet. She crossed the room quickly, her eyes scanning his face, as though searching for any sign of life. Aiden wasn't sure if it was hope or pity he saw there. She had no reason to care about him anymore, not after everything he had become. And yet, here she was, still clinging to the idea that somehow, they could fix this. That somehow, he could fix it. How much longer, she asked, her voice trembling. How much longer do you think you can hold on? Aiden didn't answer right away. His breath came in shallow gasps, his chest rising and falling like it might collapse under its own weight. He could feel it. The virus was inside him, inside every cell, rewiring his DNA, breaking him down. But even as his body fought to give in, his mind pushed forward. There was still something left. Something human. Something worth saving. I don't know, he said at last, his voice barely audible. But I know I can't stop now. Not when we're this close. Amelia's eyes narrowed, and she reached into the pocket of her coat, pulling out a small device. It was a handheld scanner, designed to analyze the virus and detect its mutations. She had been working on it for days, refining it with the last scraps of technology they could salvage. I've been testing the antidote, she said, her voice almost distant as she stared at the scanner in her hand. We're getting closer, but the virus is evolving faster than we can keep up. Every time we think we have a solution, it adapts. It's like it's learning. Evolving. I think it knows we're coming for it. Aiden swallowed hard, looking at the machine in her hand. He felt a flicker of hope, but it was a fragile thing, like a candle in a storm. He had seen the failures. He had seen the people who had tried to fight the virus, only to fall to it like everyone else. They all thought they were close, and then they were gone, erased from existence. But Amelia wasn't like the others. She had a tenacity that Aiden admired. She hadn't given up yet. And neither would he. He turned away, pacing to the window where the crumbling skyline of the city still loomed in the distance. The storm clouds gathered above, the sky darkening as if the world itself knew the end was near. Do you think they knew what they were doing? He asked, his voice distant. Do you think they realized that the virus would do this? That it would destroy everything, including them? Amelia didn't answer immediately, but Aiden could feel her hesitation. She wasn't just a scientist anymore. She was a survivor. They both were. And sometimes, survival meant confronting things that didn't make sense. I don't think they realized the full extent, she said finally. But they should have. They had to have known that it would evolve. That it would become something we couldn't control. But by the time they realized, it was too late. Aiden nodded, turning away from the window. He walked over to her, his footsteps heavy, dragging with the weight of his own decay. It's never too late. Not for us. She gave him a sad smile. You say that like you believe it. I do, he replied firmly, though a part of him wasn't so sure. I've already lost so much. My body, my mind, hell, I'm barely human anymore. But I'm still fighting. I'm still here. Her eyes softened as she stepped closer, her fingers lightly brushing his arm, careful not to touch the infected areas where his skin had become translucent and crackled with the energy of the virus. "You don't have to fight this alone, Aiden. I'm not going anywhere." Aiden's throat tightened, the words caught between his teeth. He had never been one for comfort, never one to rely on anyone. But Amelia had become a constant, even when everything else in his life had turned to dust. She was a reminder of what he had been, and what he still had the chance to save. If he could just hang on long enough. "I know," he said, his voice low. "But this isn't just about us anymore. It's about the world. It's about stopping this damn virus before it takes everything. Before it takes all of us." The days that followed were a blur of pain and purpose. Aiden's body was no longer his own, but he couldn't stop now. He couldn't let the virus win. Not when the fate of the world rested on his shoulders. He and Amelia traveled together, moving from one research facility to another, following the remnants of the global network of scientists who had once worked on the antidote. But every time they thought they were getting closer to a solution, the virus adapted, shifted, twisted into something more lethal. The people they encountered were rarely survivors. Most had already fallen to the virus, their bodies long dissolved into nothingness. As time passed, Aiden's body continued to deteriorate. His limbs grew weaker, his muscles almost gone. But he kept absorbing the virus, pushing through the agony because it was the only way to keep moving forward. Each time he absorbed more, he felt himself slip further away. It was as if he were no longer tethered to his past, no longer tethered to his humanity. Yet, somehow, he pressed on. For Amelia. For the world, and finally, they found it. A hidden facility, deep in the mountains, untouched by the chaos that had swept across the globe. There, deep within the heart of the research complex, they discovered what they had been searching for, the virus's original blueprint. The source code that would allow them to unravel its effects. But it wasn't just the blueprint that awaited them. It was the truth. The truth about the people who had created this nightmare. And the truth about Aiden himself. As Aiden stood before the massive console, his fingers shaking as he keyed in the final sequence, the enormity of it all hit him. He was the cure, but he was also the weapon. The world had been built on mistakes, on arrogance, on playing God. And now, Aiden had to make the ultimate choice, the choice between saving humanity and saving himself. Aiden's fingers hovered over the console, trembling as the data cascaded down the screen in front of him. His mind was barely functioning at this point, the virus inside him doing its best to tear away the remnants of his humanity. But there was no going back now. The truth, the solution they had so desperately sought, lay before him. Amelia stood a few paces away, watching him carefully. Her eyes were full of doubt and hope, both of which were reflected in Aiden's own broken gaze. He could feel her presence, steady and unwavering, like a beacon in the madness. But even she couldn't fully comprehend the magnitude of what he was about to do. She couldn't know how much of him was already gone. She couldn't see that the man she was relying on was already slipping, inch by inch, into oblivion. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt truly alive, when his thoughts weren't clouded by the relentless tug of the virus. Every moment was a battle for control. Every breath, a struggle. He glanced at the blinking lights on the console, the virus's core structure laid bare in front of him, as though the very fate of the world depended on his next move. Aiden pressed the key, the screen flickered, and the holographic data projection shimmered into life. He barely understood it. His vision blurred. Numbers, equations, patterns, all of it felt like a foreign language now, something beyond his reach. But the one thing that cut through it all was the one thing he needed, the antidote. It was there, encoded in the strands of data, hidden beneath layers of complexity. Amelia, Aiden's voice was rough, barely a whisper. He could feel his throat tightening, as though it were being squeezed shut. "I can't fix it. Can't reverse it. The virus, it's in me. Amelia stepped closer, her face full of concern. Aiden, you're not alone in this. We can figure it out together. You just have to. No, he interrupted, his voice breaking. I am the virus. There's nothing left of me. His eyes flitted to the screen again, and the horrifying truth sank in. The antidote wasn't a simple cure. It wasn't just something that could be injected, something that could be applied and absorbed. The antidote required something more. It required Aiden's complete destruction. He was the key. He was the solution. But he was also the weapon, the force of annihilation. And in order to destroy the virus, to reverse it and save what was left of humanity, he would have to destroy himself in the process. There was no other way. Aiden swallowed hard, the reality of it sinking in with the weight of 1,000 anvils. Every part of him wanted to scream, to fight, to flee. But he couldn't. Not anymore. The man he had been was long gone. The man who had cracked jokes and cared about the small things, the man who had dreamed of changing the world for the better, had vanished along with his humanity. The virus had taken everything, but it had given him a chance to fix it all. It had made him the one thing that could end it. And now he had to do it. He turned to Amelia, his gaze locking with hers, and for a moment, they stood in silence. The hum of the console and the distant sounds of the world outside filled the void between them, but neither spoke. Aiden didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if words could convey what he was feeling. How could he explain to her that he wasn't the person she had trusted anymore? How could he make her understand that in this final moment, there was no hope of survival? Not for him, at least. She reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm in a tender gesture, though her touch barely registered in his shattered body. Aiden, her voice was soft, almost pleading. You don't have to do this. There's another way. There has to be another way. There isn't, he said quietly, his voice tinged with sadness. I can't hold on much longer. And the virus, it's already rewriting my DNA. The antidote, it's a part of me now. To stop it, I have to become part of the cure. There's no way to separate them. Amelia's face crumpled, her eyes filled with unspeakable pain, but she didn't back away. She stayed by his side, her presence a small flicker of light in the storm of his mind. But Aiden knew. He knew that if he didn't make this choice, the virus would win. It would wipe out everything, everything they had fought for, everything he had ever known. And he couldn't let that happen. Not while he still had the strength to fight back. His body screamed at him to stop, to run, to flee from the pain that awaited him. But his mind was set. There was no other way. With a deep breath, he activated the final sequence on the console. The hologram flickered and dissolved, the virus's blueprint dissolving into code, locking into place. Aiden felt it all, every fiber of his being pulling apart as the virus responded, its final reaction pulling him further into the abyss. His vision blurred again, and this time, he wasn't sure if it was tears or just the overwhelming darkness. Amelia didn't move, didn't speak. She just watched as the virus began to unfold inside him, as the antidote started to take hold of his deteriorating body. But the process wasn't fast enough. He could feel himself unraveling, his muscles turning to ash, his flesh disintegrating with every passing second. The energy within him, once so chaotic and uncontrollable, was now the key to saving the world. It was both a blessing and a curse. It was all he had left. The virus inside him was fighting, desperately trying to remain in control, but Aiden's will was stronger. His body was breaking apart, but his mind remained clear, focused on the one thing that mattered. He looked at Amelia one last time. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice a ghost of its former self. I couldn't save myself. She didn't speak. Instead, she moved closer, her hand finding his, her touch faint against his crumbling skin. In that moment, Aiden could feel the world slipping away. The virus, the antidote, and all the pieces of himself that he had held onto for so long, the last remnants of a life he could never return to, vanished into the ether. The antidote finished its work. The virus was no more. Aiden's body crumbled to dust, his existence reduced to nothing but particles in the wind. And in the silence that followed, the world, for the first time in years, began to heal.